In Japan, as in every other totalitarian state, the government does not represent the people, but rests in the hands of a few who rule by force. For an American accustomed to the freedoms of a democracy, an all-powerful government such as this is difficult to understand. But for the Japanese, the government is not to be understood. It is to be worshipped with fevered nationalism and bowed to with the deepest reverence. The fate of the 80 million Japanese people actually rests in the hands of a few strong political, economic, and militaristic power groups. Compared to the living standard of the average American, the Japanese citizen lives in relative poverty. But regardless of this condition, their government leaders still live in sheer luxury. This is the summer villa of the late Prince Saionji, the last of the great elder statesmen of Japan. The Diet is the focal point of all Japanese government and compares in structure to the American Congress. The Emperor is the supreme head of the Japanese nation. What the Emperor does is not particularly important. His potency does not lie in his power as an individual, but in the weight his name carries. As such, his value is great, and he has been conveniently used by the groups that actually control the government. Behind Hirohito's almost godlike position is a religion called Shinto, or the way of the gods. Through Shintoism, Japan has made a religion of her nationalism. When the Japanese people bow in deepest reverence to their emperor, they bow not in empty ritual. This is their gesture of divine servitude to their temporal power. When they are told to bow, they bow. When they are told to obey, they obey. And as we have found out so well in this war, when they are told to die, they die. The Japanese pomp of empire, which follows the European pattern of the 19th century, has been adopted in much of the Japanese court. This is the royal procession as it is going to the opening of the 71st Diet. It was on this day that the Emperor advised the Diet of the China incident. This is the Imperial Hotel. It is here that many of Japan's policies are molded before they reach the Diet. As with the heads of government in other countries, so too in Japan, the Emperor attends many public functions. He very often honors generals and admirals and receives ministers and industrialists. Here he is on his way to the Imperial University to address a mass gathering of some 10,000 students. Acting as a focus for the power of the various groups that run the government is the Emperor's sole purpose. His people firmly believe that the state exists only for his honor and glory. To them, he is the Son of Heaven. He is Japan. His worship is never forgotten. The people are taught to fear even uttering his name, and it is considered far too sacred to print. Now the university president, Hiraya, steps up on the platform to lead the school body in 3 banzais to welcome the Emperor. Typical of feudal Japan, much of which still exists, is the castle of Osaka, built about 450 years ago. Here again, the Emperor is playing the role as the divine spokesman for the power groups. He is paying a visit to the ancient shrine to beseech the gods to grant victory to the arms of Japan. This is the informal procession as it enters the famous old tiled gate of the shrine. These shrines are the pride of the Japanese people, and they are styled in typical Japanese elegance. There is no glitter or false ornament in them. There is instead a harmony of line, delicately curved roofs, huge supporting brackets, and solid dignified beams. This superficial good taste was fresh and new to the Western world, and as we later found out, was a misrepresentation of the true nature and motives of Japan. The Shinto priests offer prayers for the success of the Japanese army, and the ladies play music and offer sacred dances. This is another ceremony at the famous Meiji Shrine in Tokyo. Unlike Italy and Germany, religion has not been a stumbling block to Japan in waging her war. The Japanese militarists instead found in the Shintoism of Japan a ready-made tool for their purposes. This recently resurrected religion emerged from dim obscurity after 1,000 years of Buddhism and Confucianism. Truly enough, The religion is based on a myth. The people are taught to believe that their emperors are descendants of the sun goddess and that the Japanese people are of divine origin. They are also taught to believe that Japan has a sacred mission to save the world. Consequently, the China incident has been called the Holy War. This kind of thinking has stimulated the pride of the Japanese people in their race and their nation. And cleverly enough, the Japanese government and army have capitalized by combining and becoming a part of this mythical religion. These are a few scenes of a meeting of the cabinet that was in power prior to the Pearl Harbor incident. That's Minister of the Navy, Vice Admiral Yoshida. Minister of Foreign Affairs, Matsuoka. Minister of Justice, Shiono. Minister of Commerce and Industry, Kobayashi. Minister of Communications and Transportation, Murata. Minister without portfolio, Hoshino. Minister of Education, Yasui. And the one so familiar today, Minister of War, Tōjō. Army Chief of Staff, Prince Kanin. Navy Chief of Staff, Prince Fushimi. And finally, the Prime Minister, Prince Konoe. Konoe is the descendant of an old Japanese aristocratic family and was formerly one of the Japanese ambassadors to Washington. These are the men who spurred Japanese expansion and plotted with Hitler for the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. But unlike Germany, there is no one of these men who can claim to be the dictator of Japan. The emperor is absolute and can never be removed or replaced for any reason. The island empire is simply a dictatorship without a single individual dictator. It is a dictatorship under the control of several power groups that follow the tradition of exhorting the people instead of consulting them, and do so by hiding behind the emperor and playing a mythical religion for all it's worth. These are the men who were going to dictate the peace terms in Washington. This is the entire cabinet of a few years ago as it poses for a formal picture. That's Prince Konoe again in the center of the group. He is one of Japan's tallest as well as shrewdest politicians. These are some informal scenes of the cabinet members as they discuss Japan's foreign policy. Once, these men firmly controlled the future of Japan. Public opinion, as we know it, will never play any part in the direction of the government's policy. Even the most educated Japanese consider themselves incapable of being able to have any part in the direction of their government. There is no strong, organized underground group prepared to lead a revolt, and it is questionable if there is a possibility of any internal collapse or revolution against these few powerful men.